Well, good morning, and thank you for the opportunity to be here today with you. My name is Chuck Pascarelli, and I am the president of the Hyster-Yale Group, Americas Division. And I'm also honored to serve as the current chairman of the ITA Board of Directors through 2023. I just want to say that we are in this incredible venue in Washington, D.C. at the National Press Club celebrating the 9th annual Forklift Safety Day. And I will tell you, if ever you have the opportunity to come here and visit, it would be well worth your while. Just an incredible place to be. First of all, I want to thank all the panelists for being here today. All of us probably in this room and on the camera recognize that to actually sit on a panel like this requires just a tremendous amount of work and effort and takes you away from your daily activities. So we want to thank you for doing that. I want to thank you for your support in creating awareness around forklift safety. So again, much appreciated on behalf of everybody that's listening and watching. I'd also like to thank the people that have joined here in Washington, D.C. today. We have a room of about 60 people, and would like to thank all of you that are streaming this live. I think there are about 650 participants, which is, I think, I think it's a record, but thank you so much. I believe that National Forklift Safety Day really creates a real opportunity for our industry to collectively highlight the importance of safety and the need for ongoing training. The reasons that this are so important are really, it's threefold. Right? As you'll hear from Assistant Secretary of Labor, Mr. Doug Parker, it's simply the law. Followed by Jonathan, President and CEO of KION. He'll talk about why it just makes good business sense. And then the final two presentations by Dematic's Lorne, Weeter, and Crown's Brian Duffy, both will suggest that either through automation or better training, it just very simply improves and creates a safer work environment. Very critical. To help facilitate today's dialogue, we're hoping that it will be a robust dialogue. We'll be entertaining questions after each speaker talks. What we'll do is we'll actually answer questions from the room, and we'll also answer questions online. If you have a question online, please just hit the chat button, and the question will go to Brian Feehan, who will then moderate the questioning to the panelists. So let's get started with our first speaker. We're pleased to have with us the Assistant Secretary of Labor for Occupational Safety and Health, Mr. Doug Parker. Just to provide you with a bit of context and history on Mr. Parker, quite a rich history actually. Mr. Parker was sworn in as the Assistant Secretary of Labor on November 3rd, 2021. He previously served in the Obama administration as Deputy Assistant Secretary for Policy in the Department of Labor's Mine Safety and Health Administration, and was a member of the Biden-Harris transition team focused on worker health and safety issues. He's also held positions as Senior Policy Advisor and Special Assistant at the Department of Labor. He most recently served as Chief of California's Division of Occupational Safety and Health, Cal OSHA. A position that he's held since 2019. And prior to his appointment at Cal OSHA, Mr. Parker was the Executive Director of WorkSafe, an Oakland, California-based legal services provider. Before serving in the Obama administration, Mr. Parker was a partner in the law firm Mooney, Green, Sadin, Murphy, and Welch. Quite a list of partners there. And Mr. Parker earned his JD from the University of Virginia School of Law and a BA in History from James Madison University. Doug, with that, I'd like to turn the podium over to you.
Thank you, Chuck, for that introduction. I appreciate it. Brian, for the opportunity to be here. I appreciate the invitation. I also want to thank those of you who are participating virtually. One of the, hate to talk about benefits from a pandemic, but certainly one of the offshoots of it is that we have opportunities to get much more participation in events that have traditionally been focused in places like Washington, where we get more and we can get more input from our members if we're an association. It gives the opportunity for a much wider group of folks to participate in these events and for us to spread the important message that we have about health and safety in the forklift industry. I should say there was one important part of my bio that was omitted. I did spend a summer as a temporary worker in a warehouse, and I was telling some folks before the meeting just how much things have changed. I recently was at one of our VPP sites, a warehouse at a Frito-Lay factory in Ohio, and I was just amazed at the pace of work and the the speed with which things were happening, that powered industrial trucks were moving around, the technology that was put in place in terms of motion detection and warning and other safety features on the devices. I was just so impressed, and so I look forward in my time here at OSHA to learn more about the industry and have more opportunities for engagement. I should also mention that while these types of events also often involve sort of me talking from the dais and maybe we get a few questions, if there's ever a time we need to sit down and have a more in-depth conversation about something, I certainly welcome that because it gives me more of an opportunity to learn from you all. When I first came to OSHA, one of the things that I talked about with our staff was the importance of safety as a core value. If you ask people what really matters in their life, what's most important to them, what they really care about, it's not typically, money or fame or things like that. It's health and safety, the health and safety of their loved ones, the health and safety of their own health, and the health and safety of their families. And that's very much how I see the mission of OSHA. Our job, working with employers, working with other stakeholders, unions, worker groups, is to make sure that we keep families together, that people don't have to suffer because of needless workplace injuries or tragic deaths or occupational illness. And I consider it a critically important and vital role. And I appreciate the opportunity, whenever I have it, to speak to organizations like this and give that message and to make sure that we have opportunities to work together to advance that message to the folks who aren't necessarily in this room. You know, there are in some ways three, broadly speaking, types of employers that we engage with at OSHA. The first are the models, the folks who are in our voluntary programs, the folks who are really out there innovating, bringing new technology to the table, engaged in regular training. They make health and safety a core part of their work. They make it a core value of their business, just as important as making their inventory or their payroll. There's another group that sees injuries and illnesses as a cost of doing business, unfortunately, and those are the folks who see the most from our enforcement staff and the ones for whom we are dedicated to using all the enforcement tools at our disposal to address their disregard for worker safety, because it's totally unacceptable. And then the third group, which I think is the majority of employers, falls somewhere in the middle. They want to do the right thing. Maybe they're not a large enough employer to have a professional health and safety staff on board. They want to do the right thing, but they need some help, guidance, training, or some kind of other assistance. And when I look at the landscape, there's certainly efforts that we want to make on all of these fronts, but it's that group that's somewhere in the middle is where we can make, in my view, the most ground, working together with organizations like this to improve things like worker safety, to improve things like training. I think it's also certainly a unique opportunity to talk to a group that's involved in the manufacturing of powered industrial trucks, because it's a tremendous opportunity to bring design advances that advance worker safety. One of the things that I've encountered in my work, especially in California with some of the businesses that I dealt with there, is that they were incredibly focused on innovation, and they were making these tremendous products, and they were bringing these things to market that were kind of, first industry leaders, but they weren't really putting the same kind of innovation in the design of their manufacturing lines. And so, workers were getting injured needlessly because the kind of ergonomic considerations that needed to be put into the thinking about and engineering of the manufacturing line weren't there. And so there's a tremendous opportunity to think very holistically about how we incorporate health and safety into all aspects, from the construction of equipment, through the supply chain, through training, and through every aspect of how industrial trucks touch our economy and the vital role that they play in moving goods throughout this country. One of the things that I'm very proud of and that we are working on is to develop our Safe and Sound campaign. I don't know how many of you are familiar with it, but its focus is on encouraging companies to develop and maintain health and safety management systems. And one of the things that we're developing right now is tools that make incremental steps more possible for companies. A lot of large companies are the ones that engage in these kinds of programs because they're the ones with the resources. And smaller companies are sometimes intimidated by the notion of building a health and safety management program. They think about it being costly. They think about it being this huge investment. But there are incremental steps that every company can make to improve their health and safety culture. And we look forward to rolling that out soon to give more tools to employers, particularly small and medium-sized employers, to start developing these programs, to start building the health and safety culture in their business. It's certainly also an opportunity for us to engage with groups such as yours. The forklift industry has been using technology to great advantage, designing and manufacturing self-driving and automated power industrial trucks, shows a real vision of future, actually present-day work situations where we have an opportunity through technology to make things safer for workers. As technology continues to change and advance, we must all continue to examine safety training requirements as well for equipment operators, as well as people who work around forklifts as they move about workplaces. That kind of vision and forward thinking is going to be critically important. Likewise, as you develop the equipment itself, how we can implement safety into the very design of these forklifts is critical, as I said. I want to also mention a couple of other topics before we get on to questions. I would be remiss if I didn't note the importance of COVID-19. It's been the health and safety issue of our time. It's been difficult. It's been an incredibly difficult 2 years, but many of the workers deemed essential are workers in the industries that you serve, warehousing and other industries that are moving goods. They have been essential workers, and they've been at the forefront of the challenges of COVID-19. And I suspect that many of your workers in the manufacturing supply chain for industrial power trucks have been through some of the worst challenges of the pandemic. And I just want to express my condolences to those of you who've had to deal with those challenges in your workplaces. And while these things are changed, we're very fortunate that we have vaccines. We're very fortunate that, that we are in a much better place than we were a year and a half ago. It continues to be critical that we continue to face these exposure hazards in the workplace and that we remain diligent to make sure that our workers are safe and that we have, you have the workers that you need, particularly in this labor market, to continue to provide goods and services to your clients. You're probably aware of our heat initiative. The dangers of extreme heat are getting progressively worse due to the impact of climate change, but you don't have to look at climate change or have that debate to recognize that heat is a serious issue in the workplace, and certainly in many of the workplaces where industrial powered trucks are used. I know that having been from California, working with workers in the Inland Empire, where something like 40%, I think, of imported products in the United States travel through there, through the warehouse system and supply chain system there. Heat is an incredibly challenging hazard. And so this is not just a phenomenon that affects outdoor workers. It's been the leading cause of death among all weather-related phenomenon. More than 900 workers that we know of that have been recorded deaths have died from heat-related issues since 1992, and we strongly believe that that is an undercount. Warehouses and manufacturing plants and many other places that forklift operators do their jobs can have very high temperatures all year long in all parts of the country. And this combination of high temperature and exertion levels can lead to illness, injury, and death if not properly mitigated. And so we have launched a national emphasis program that begins with education. Not enough people understand the risks of heat. And so we have taken upon ourselves to launch an emphasis program where when the heat index exceeds 80, which with the right exertion, that can, with certain exertion levels, that can certainly be hazardous. Our inspectors are going to be making sure that employers, when they are engaged with them, are aware of heat hazards. We'll be distributing information. We'll be doing education. Our consulting services will be providing information as well. We'll be doing significant outreach. And we'll also, for the first time in our history, be doing proactive inspections for heat hazards when the National Weather Service issues heat advisories. It's important that employers establish basic precautions for heat. Some of the most important ones beyond rest, water, and shade, which are the ones that we have historically emphasized, include acclimation and monitoring of employers and training them, training employees on the hazards of heat to make sure that they're aware. Because about 50% of heat fatalities happen in the first 10 days of an employee being on the job. So it's critically important that we monitor employers when they're early in their tenure in a high heat workplace to make sure that they're acclimating properly. I know that many of you are interested in the ongoing work on powered industrial trucks and the design standard update. We published a notice of proposed rulemaking in February of this year. Our action is focused on the incorporation by reference of national consensus standards listed in OSHA's rule for the design and construction requirements of powered industrial trucks. The comment period closed on May 17th, and we are currently reviewing those comments. So we are in active rulemaking. We've received 23 comments. They are generally supportive of our efforts. There were a few outside the scope of what we're doing in the rule. But they are going to be useful, and they will be considered in our future actions as we take next steps on this rule. This is the challenge that this particular rulemaking is an example of, is one that's endemic in OSHA rules, many of which are out of date. We have about 200 references altogether in our Code of Federal Regulations that relate to consensus standards. And some of them are more than 50 years old. In fact, the powered industrial truck standard is based on a consensus standard. The rule was adopted in 1971, and the consensus standard is from 1969. So, as you know, it is in dire need of updating. We are hopeful that when we get through some of our other kind of heavy lift rulemaking, that we can devote more resources to updating consensus standards in our rules. We have a system that just doesn't work the way that it should for both employers, for workers, and for our staff who's out trying to educate and enforce the law. And so we certainly need to take more action to improve and modernize our standards. And I want you to know that we recognize that at OSHA, and that we'll continue to do it within the resource and kind of legal confines that we have under the Administrative Procedure Act and other rules that we have to follow when we make our standards. Unfortunately, it's not, we can't just incorporate things by reference and have them updated, which certainly, while there's pros and cons, it would certainly have a lot of pluses. We have to go through regular rulemaking, full rulemaking whenever we are even doing a basic adoption of a consensus standard. So I'm sure that those of you in the room that have participated in this process are well aware of that. But bear with us as we slowly work to improve some of these outdated rules. I know that we wanted to make sure there's plenty of time for questions, so I'll just stop by saying that we at OSHA want to have good jobs that are safe and healthy. We don't have to choose between good jobs and safe and healthy jobs. And I appreciate that the folks here in this room are committed to that effort. And I look forward to working with you in the future how we can improve health and safety, not just for the workers that you employ, but the workers that your customers employ in the warehouse and other critical infrastructure industries. So thanks very much. We have some time for questions.
Yeah. So actually, I have a question. First of all, thank you very much for being here. We appreciate the participation for you coming over and speaking to us. And we also really appreciate the relationship that we have with your staff in OSHA, and we have. So we do appreciate the relationship that we've had with OSHA over the years. One of the, through our ambassador program that we have with OSHA, we've been doing compliance officer training seminars for a number of years. And with the COVID and the pandemic, we haven't been able to host those seminars. We train your OSHA inspectors on the latest technology and developments in the powered industrial truck business. And so we're eager to get back to it. So, I'll follow up with Chrissy and your staff to make sure that we can get those moving again. But one of the questions I guess I had is, first of all, we're excited to get that back going in. Is that something that OSHA is, or have OSHA moved on beyond the pandemic in terms of returning to work at the state level as well as at the federal level?
Well, I think that our field staff has been on the job for some time. Despite some of the press on this, we've been doing in-person inspections for the vast majority of the pandemic. We are transitioning back into a more, regular workplace setting, although we've also found that a lot of our staff are able to do their jobs and like doing their jobs from home. And so for folks who don't have jobs that require them to be in the field, a lot of that flexibility will probably remain. But we are reopening our training center in Illinois to in-person instruction. And certainly what that means is that we should be able to do more of the kind of in-person instruction that you described through the ambassador program. Let me say I appreciate that you all are doing that. It's very important. Our inspectors, as you know, have to cover a vast range of situations in general industry, and the opportunity to hear from folks with subject matter expertise to give them a better understanding of powered industrial trucks or the workplaces in which they operate is invaluable for their development. So we appreciate that.
No, thank you. Thank you. We have received another question online, and the question is there an estimated date of when the new forklift standard will be out for the general public?
I don't have an estimated date. I know that folks are working on it diligently. It'll have to go through legal review, but now that the comment period is closed, work in earnest is underway. So.
I don't know if there are any questions from the room. Okay, thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. Thanks.
Thank you, Assistant Secretary Parker. Greatly appreciate kind of what you laid out foundational about a health and safety culture. It's something that I think everybody in this room very much aspires to. I do have one quick question for you, if I may, though. You talked about working in a warehouse, and so we're curious as to whether you drove a forklift truck
I was not certified. Although that's not
That's
the
the right answer.
actually.
Okay. That's the right answer. It was a test.
I did not drive a forklift. Okay. I did not drive a forklift.
All right. We thought we had a gotcha. Again, thank you so very much. Now I'd like to take the opportunity to introduce our next speaker, somebody that I know and respect very much. Jonathan and I work together. Jonathan Dawley is the president and CEO of KION Americas. He's also serving as this year's chair for the National Forklift Safety Day. And I know that Jonathan put a lot of work into this, and of course, we're benefiting from his tremendous creativity. Jonathan joined the KION Group from Putzmeister Holding, a subsidiary of Sani Heavy Industry Corporation, where he was the head of Americas region for over 2 years. Between 2014 and 2018, he was responsible for the global aftermarket business at JLG, a subsidiary of OSHA Corporation. He gained extensive experience in intralogistics as well as in the material handling business in various senior management roles at Hyster-Yale Material Handling, where he was there from 2005 to 2014. And I will say that when Jonathan left, he had, I think, what was the coolest title of anybody in this room or anybody probably watching from the live, the mainstream or the video stream. He was the president of big trucks. It's like everybody's dream to actually be the president of big trucks. And Jonathan held that title for a few years and just did a great job for us. So Jonathan studied business administration at Baker College in Auburn Hills, Michigan. And Jonathan, with that, I'd like to turn it over to you, and we look forward to hearing what you have to say.
Thanks for your comments, Chuck. When Brian asked me to chair this year's event, I quickly said yes and was eager to do so, and identified three main agenda points that we wanted to focus on. The first was culture, which the Assistant Secretary just did a phenomenal job going through and talking to us about, and we'll spend some more time talking about today. The next item is technology, and the fact that technology is developing so quickly in our environment, and we can leverage technology to enhance on the basics of a good culture to really make a strong health and safety environment for our employees. And then lastly is to drive awareness of what our dealer communities within the Industrial Truck Association can provide to the end user market in terms of consulting and support to improve in the safety culture. So wanted to talk about really where we've come from. If you look pre-pandemic, a few years ago, as we were in pre-pandemic times looking at a very tight labor market, and we were looking for an employee base, we're struggling with retention, looking for individuals to come into our manufacturing operations or warehousing operations and competing with one another for that. And now going through the pandemic and experiencing a different labor market, and now coming out the backside of that, seeing yet again an even tighter labor market and unique environment. And the significant portion of this has to do with turnover that we're seeing, turnover and retention issues. And with that, we see significant numbers of new people entering the workplace on a consistent basis. And with that is the importance of training that goes along with dealing with a significant number of new employees coming in. And as we now see these employees with may not have experience in distribution environments, in production environments, training them up in the right way becomes a very critical aspect. And as our businesses struggle with things like significant amounts of inventory coming to them, capacity issues within our supply chain, shortages in terms of workers at the port, and stoppages and backups at ports, we end up seeing that inventory can overwhelm our environments. Variability becomes a norm in both the manufacturing and distribution environment. And with that amount of variability, we see challenges around standard work. And things become, again, with variability and lack of consistency, the need to keep people informed and trained becomes very important as we go towards building a strong safety culture. And executing on the basics becomes very important. And we can talk about very advanced things and about technology, which we'll go through today, but operator training is a very basic element, and not all companies are keeping up with the simple basics of forklift operator training. in the Industrial Truck Association, its members with its dealer communities and manufacturers provide the capability to get out and train companies and provide those services on an ongoing basis. And so encourage you to reach out to the dealer networks within the Industrial Truck Association to leverage on this operator training, again, supporting these basics. Pedestrian awareness, so it's not just about driving a forklift and maintaining forklift safety within an operation, it's also the pedestrians that are throughout those operations. And as we experience this variability that I spoke about related to potentially overwhelming inventories or new employees consistently coming into the operation, staying up with pedestrian awareness is also just as critical as keeping up with making sure that we have trained forklift operators in our facilities. With that is the basics of communication. And that could be as simple as facility signage, traffic patterns being noted within a facility, just driving overall safety awareness to employees of that. And so as Assistant Secretary mentioned already, the importance of creating the safety culture is there, and these are the very most basic things that we can do to drive awareness within our businesses. We can take it to another level. We can also include town halls, so getting out in front of the employee base on a consistent basis and leading from the top. Management being out in front of employees, whether it be in the front end of the business or the back end of the business on the shop floor, making sure that we're communicating and letting people know that it's important at the very top management levels. One-on-one training, spending time individually with operators on the shop floor, reinforcing basic principles on a consistent basis. Value stream events, on the shop floor events, part of lean manufacturing, focusing on safety is an important element of the KPIs that we track. And then again, is on the right-hand bottom part of the slide is just basic facility signage to make sure that there's awareness within a site. With this, we also have technology that is developing out, and we can leverage on that to develop out on the basics. As we go forward, again, in a constrained labor environment, more and more employers are looking towards automation as a mechanism not only to improve productivity and profitability, but to deal with employee shortages, and are now looking to this technology, which is advancing very quickly. There are different types of automation. We have automated guided vehicles, which are bespoke designed vehicles for a specific operation. We have automated guided forklifts, AGFs. And AGFs can be a manual forklift that has automation technology built on top of it. And then we have other technologies such as telematics. Telematics is a technology, a wireless technology that can be deployed on equipment. The beauty of that product is that we can identify who is on the equipment. If an impact has occurred, we can actually segment a facility into zones and control speed, keep people that should not be in certain sites out of that type of operation. And in terms of maintenance, if the machine is not ready to be able to be put into service, an operator checklist, a pre-operator checklist, can be identified on that machine, and if necessary, the vehicle will be automatically locked out and not be able to be put in service until it's repaired. So we're able to drive safety by leveraging on this technology. And the beauty is technology is becoming more and more affordable and is becoming more standardly deployed on equipment. So it's available ubiquitously across the industry. And then lastly, we have newer technology, which is collision avoidance or operator awareness systems being deployed. And with this technology, we're able to use LiDAR and other wireless technologies for identifying if an obstacle is in the way, if another forklift is nearby, vehicles are communicating with one another to make sure there's not a collision, and we can communicate with an operator specifically to make sure that the operator is maintained out of harm's way. And I'll talk about this in just a minute here. So as we look specifically at collision avoidance or operator and pedestrian awareness systems, the first example that I'll give you is an operator, in this case, with a paper roll and a clamp on the front of a machine. Could have limited visibility going through an open door. On the other side of that open door could be another piece of equipment, could be an individual, and there is a facility, as you can see in the picture here, If that mast was raised and they happened to go through that doorway with a raised mast, they could actually hit the facility and cause damage or injury to themselves or others. And so with collision avoidance systems, we can actually outfit an entire facility, people, and the equipment to ensure that the vehicle is either automatically slowed or an alert goes out to alert the individual to make sure they don't continue proceeding forward. In addition, in the picture on the bottom section here is a pedestrian, and that pedestrian is actually outfitted with a pedestrian awareness system, which gives them audible and physical alerts and visual alerts. And the individual in the vehicle, you can see on the screen there, has a unit within the lift truck itself that actually identifies specifically where that pedestrian is, or another lift truck may be, and they don't necessarily have to have visual line of sight for the system to work to identify where that individual or a piece of equipment might actually be. The vehicle will actually provide a visual and audible alert and even potentially control the truck in the instance that a collision is imminent. So technology can really help us become more safe, but it is not a replacement for building a strong safety culture, which Mr. Brian Duffy from Crown is going to talk to us here in a second. In addition, with these same operator awareness or collision avoidance systems, we can also do zone control, which enables us to control speed within a specific section of the facility. And then, as I've already mentioned, specific vehicles can be outfitted and do not have to have line of sight in order to be able to communicate with one another and slow down in the event or alert the operators in the event that a collision could be occurring. So as we go forward and leverage on technology, as I've just mentioned, it is not a replacement for a solid culture. And the first step in developing a solid culture is to ensure that we at the very top are leading our businesses as owners, managers, and stewards of our people. And if we are not committed at the very top to continue driving this through, to be visible with this messaging, a culture will not be held together. And with that, we need to start by sharing, by communicating effectively and consistently with our people, and to engage them, and taking it not just to signage, town halls, but actually take it to the next level by implementing KPIs and mechanisms and review processes that make sure that that's driven through on a consistent basis and our people are engaged all throughout the management stream. We've talked about training today and how important that is. As our businesses get overwhelmed with the unique environment that we're living in today, our training processes can be overwhelmed as well. They can easily fall apart. And so we have to stay on top of that as leaders to make sure that those systems are sustained on a continuous basis and that our people are learning from that training. And learning is demonstrated by action, and that action, it can really be managed through accountability. And so, again, it comes back to leadership, that we have deployed processes, KPIs, and measurements out into the business, and that we're consistently following up on that through our value stream activities and driving that compliance activity. So overall, we can develop a strong safety culture by following this model. As I mentioned at the beginning of my comments, the third element of our goal for this year in this event was to drive awareness about what our organizations within the Industrial Truck Association are capable of doing. All of the manufacturers and the dealer networks and even third parties within the industry can provide operator training to businesses. We can do on-site consulting to help understand where challenges may exist, whether it is in communications within an operation, whether physical barriers, traffic patterns, management processes are in place. And again, at the very core of what we're talking about today is forklift safety, and specifically whether or not forklift operators are trained and following OSHA guidelines, we can support with that consulting. And then, of course, with pedestrians, not just about forklifts specifically, those walking around throughout the facility need to remain safe as well. And again, as facilities can have this unique variability with them in today's market environment, non-standard practices could be going on in an operation which could put pedestrians at risk. We also can focus on technology deployment as a support for this. And our dealer networks throughout the industry can come on site and do audits and evaluations to determine whether or not automation could be a good solution for your business to be able to deploy these types of technologies. As I mentioned today, automated guided vehicles, automated guided forklifts, and telematics and collision avoidance. So coming out, doing on-site evaluations and audits to help you understand how to deploy the technology, and then on an ongoing basis help you leverage that technology to your success. Thank you very much. And Brian, take any questions.
Actually, you may have just addressed it, so this may have come in a little bit earlier, but does KION North America offer training on some of the new technology, or is that offered through your dealership?
We do both. So from a manufacturer perspective, we have key account customers, both international and North American-based key accounts, which we'll engage with directly. We'll also supplement our dealers as well with regional-based accounts to do technology evaluations on site, but our dealer networks are also trained by our staff to deliver that capability out locally as well, and then we'll supplement that with specialized teams, whether it be special automation teams or specialized telematics teams or what have you.
And then another question that came in, do you embrace or use virtual training as a component of your training programs?
Absolutely. We focus heavily on online learning, especially, we all know, going through the pandemic, how important that has been. But certainly there's a new norm. And while we've all, as manufacturers across the industry, have online learning platforms, both internally and for the dealer networks, we have structured curriculums for them. But we've now also gone beyond that to really put studios in place to have really live video capabilities that enhance that training capability.
Nice. That wraps it up from the questions online.
Excellent.
Unless there's any from the audience. I'd just like to say thank you, Jonathan, for serving as National Forklift Safety Day Chair this year. We appreciate your leadership that you've showed throughout this, and just want to say thank you.
No, thank you. And thanks to you and your team doing a great job putting this together. Thank you.
Josh, as always, just an excellent job. Thank you. Really insightful. And so what we'd like to do now is introduce Lorne Weeter from Dematic. So it's just a strong kind of 1-2 punch between Jonathan and Lorne. It was interesting. Last night we had dinner, and I had an opportunity to sit across from Lorne, and he's just an interesting guy. I mean, I think that, you know, he has some deep insights that he'll provide us with, but just he's kind of like the Renaissance man. He's kind of, it's really interesting to spend time with Lorne. So Lorne is Dematic's Vice President of Mobile Automation Sales for the Americas. Mobile automation includes automated guided vehicles, automated guided forklifts, and autonomous mobile robots. Lorne's team of subject matter experts consults with customers to understand their objectives, performs simulations, recommends solutions, and provides technical assistance for all of Dematic's mobile automation solutions. Lorne also works closely with R&D and product management on strategic development plans for new mobile automation products and solutions. Prior to his current mobile automation role, Lorne led Dematic's customer service organization for the Americas. His responsibilities in this role included providing remote emergency and on-site maintenance services, managing a parts distribution center, delivering engineering services for upgrades, modernizations, consulting with customers for performance enhancements, and developing new service offerings, including digital services. Prior to Dematic, he spent 15 years in the robotics industry, primarily with Motorman Robotics and Fanuc America. Lorne holds a Bachelor of Science and a Master of Science degree in welding engineering from The Ohio State University in Columbus, Ohio. Thank you, Lorne. We look forward to hearing what you have to say.
Wow, with that introduction of Renaissance man, and isn't interesting an interesting word? What's he mean by that? We're going to find out about that. But great, thank you. It's nice to be here. It's nice to meet everybody virtually and in person to talk about safety and automation as we're talking about it with the industry. Let's see, does that, there we go. Move past the title slide here. One thing we just wanted to talk about, we've talked about a little bit here are some definitions and the kind of the types of automation that we're talking about here, from kind of the lower automation or the more manual to the fully automated, and just talk about a couple of things here because it does affect safety, does affect how you're going to apply automation within your warehouse or your manufacturing. The first one is obviously the powered industrial truck. I mean, we've talked about that a lot. That is the manual operation of the normal truck running in your warehouse. Jonathan went through some of the safety aspects and everything with that. The next one that is moving in and starting to gain a lot more traction, as Jonathan mentioned, is the automated guided forks. This is actually putting automation onto standard power industrial trucks or designing a powered industrial truck with the automation already in, as we're getting more into that area. But these can be operated in either the manual or the automated fashion. So typically in automated, they're just working in a certain area of the warehouse, but they can be taken out of the automated. Person can jump on it and drive it over into other areas and do other operations with it. But one key thing about these right now on the automated guided forks, talking about, they only work in a defined path. They're set to go from point A to point B, and that's where they operate into that area. The next, moving up the automation chain, is automated guided vehicles. Now, these are fully automated vehicles. They can't be operated in the manual fashion, even though they do have pendants in case they get stuck or they need to be operated manually. The operator can go over with the pendant and guide them back to a manual, to a maintenance station or some kind of other operation that it's going on this. But again, these only operate in a defined path. They go from point A to point B. If there is not that it would ever happen in a warehouse, but a piece of wood laying in the aisle that's not supposed to be there from a broken pallet or something, they're going to go up to that and stop. And they're going to signal the operator, wirelessly back to the operator to coming in to actually clear the obstruction that's in the area to do this. So they're very focused on that, but very set in their path that where they're doing. Both AGFs and AGVs are really governed by ANSI B56.5 safety standards for automated guided vehicles that are there to set up when the AGF is being operated in the automated fashion. But again, very clearly defined paths to what these do. The next, and this is going to bleed backwards into AGFs eventually, and it's even started now as we're moving forward, is autonomous mobile robots. Key word there is robots. So these can now do real-time path planning for doing it. They don't just have to go from point A to point B. They can use camera systems and other areas to map out the area they're doing it. This is analogous to your self-driving car, right? It's going down a lane, and it can actually change a lane and figure out how to get around an obstruction in its path. So it's using artificial intelligence, sometimes an overused term, but it is using smarts and cameras and visions to try to figure out where it's going and how to get around obstructions. That piece of wood I mentioned earlier, it would go up to it, see it, maybe back up a few feet, turn 10 degrees, and figure out how to get around it. All the while looking at safety for going around down the aisle and how it's doing it. Are there any other obstructions that are there? It's also looking at sometimes the moving objects that are coming down there. They can see people, it can see other fork trucks that are coming into that area doing it. But since it is a robot, it's also covered under our 15.08 safety standards for the autonomous side of this, because you're not just working within these blinders that B56.5 causes the systems to work under. Now you can go outside of this. And that's where it's also getting into our 15.08 standards for this. One interesting thing about AMRs, that why there are robots and why they're factored in that, you see the picture here on the screen of the little black plate on there. On top of that can be various things can be added in there to be able to handle pallets, be able to hold bins, shelves, and some companies are actually putting another robot on top of it. So more of the articulated arm robots that you see that, for spot welding cars, or you might even see these in the future going to your grocery store, going down the aisle, picking items off of grocery shelves for you if you order online for your groceries going on. But that's covered under those standards. And we'll There we go. So stepping back to AGFs and putting the automation on them. So you've taken a standard powered industrial truck. What do you got to do to it to add the automation to it, to turn it into an AGF, but also make it safe? The first thing, kind of starting at the top, is a navigation scanner there. Again, these are working on a very defined path as they're moving down the area. So you're putting a scanner on there that's looking at targets that possibly are on there. They're looking at QR codes on the floor. They're looking at wire sensors, magnetic sensors, anything that can be embedded into the floor, or even vision to looking at natural features to going down through the area. Then, of course, you've got to add a brain to it. You know, it's no longer just a manual system, so you've got to put the computer, CPU in with it and make that integrated into the package. And then with that is the user interface, because now you've got to change the user interface on that powered industrial truck. So now you can take it out of that mode or put it back into the automated mode as you're going forward, and then be able to monitor and see all of the automated features that you may want with it that you've now added into the system. Then you've added control sirens or horns and lights on it to make sure that everybody knows that it's working in an automated mode so they know how to interact with it. We'll talk about that more in a second. And then you finally get into some of the safety. Emergency stop buttons have to be accessible from all sides of the vehicles. So you have to be able to put this into the systems and into it. So it's not just throw something on a powered industrial truck and turn it into it. You need to make sure that you're putting all the safety there. And then lastly, at the very bottom, because it's usually on the bottom of the truck itself, are the laser safety scanners. Put at the bottom, that's monitoring all sides of the truck, not just in front and in back, but also the sides, so you can monitor any of the pinch points and the areas there that are being covered by safety. Just a couple of things I wanted to talk about here from the 5 key safety measures when you're looking at adding automation into there. The first, and this kind of goes, I came, as Chuck said, came out of the robotic industry doing it too, but this is for all automation that you're really doing. You really need to step back and do a site safety assessment anytime you're bringing automation into there. And think about these AGVs or AGFs. They're a 3,000-pound vehicle carrying 2,000-pound pallets going down the aisle at 400 feet per minute. So you want to make sure that you're addressing how this system, this automation is going and how your people are working with this, that it's going through. So identify the hazards, determine who is at risk, assess the likelihood and severity, and then take action. This is where the training comes in. This is making sure now that you understand where the risks are and the likelihood of it and who's it affect, those are the people you want to train and set up dedicated training programs for the people that are going to be interacting in this to make sure that they're safe. And then always check, make sure everything is working right as you're going forward. This is true for AGVs, AGFs, and AMRs as you're going forward. The next, and I know this, there are some areas in robotics where people are working very closely with robots. In fact, COVID, as Doug was talking about earlier, is kind of driving people to using robots closer to people. Because when people couldn't be 6 feet, people had to be 6 feet apart, but you could have put a person and a robot in closer areas there. So there are safety standards in working in that. But in general, we always like to recommend that you try to separate your people from the automation. It just makes sense. You eliminate any interaction, you eliminate chances for somebody to get hurt or to be damaged in the equipment. The best way to do this is obviously barriers, signage, and back to the training point of view of who are you working with and how is it going to be done and setting up into the area. Keeping the areas and say this is the automated area, this is the area for manual operation, and set up your operation accordingly so you can work that way. Sometimes when you're going into brownfield sites, sometimes that's a little bit of a challenge. It may have to change the way you're operating. You may have to move things around a little bit to try to make sure that it can be, but then that adds an extra layer of safety onto the system. The next is really the awareness of the AGV or AGF scanning capability as it's going down. The scanning range changes based on the speed of the vehicle and going around corners and everything like this that's set up with areas. So you need to know that as an operator, know what you're working with, train the people around how this works. Again, it makes sense. Doing a comparison to a tractor trailer truck going down the road at 70 miles an hour, you have to give it more stopping distance, right? If you've got an AGV going down at 400 feet per minute, there's a different stopping radius that you need to make sure you're putting into the system and make sure it's set up properly. It's there. Or when you're going into tight areas, things slow down, but you need to know that and understand it, and all the people interacting with the AGV need to understand that too. This is, to me, one of the most important, because this is, unfortunately, when most of the severe injuries have occurred, is when the AGV or the AGF is interacting in a very close area to doing it, creating a pinch point. Face it, we're using this equipment to pick up pallets and move things around. When you get close, you have to turn off, my safety people hate it when I say that, retract the scanning capability at these pickup points. You're not turning off the safety, but instead of looking at a 3-foot zone in front of you, you may be looking at a 1-inch zone in front of you. So obviously, if I'm in that pinch point, I'm thicker than 1 inch. So these are the areas that you really want to concentrate on when you're doing your safety assessment. Put up significant barriers in these areas. Make sure the signage is very clear. Make sure people understand that only trained people should be into those access points that are going on. But there are some applications it's a little bit harder to do. AGVs work in drive-in rack situations. I mean, you're basically driving into a tunnel between a couple of pallets. There's not a lot of room between there. So the AGVs slow down, or the AGFs slow down as they're getting into those areas, but the people then that might have to be in there interacting if something goes wrong need to understand this. Only skilled operators know to get into those situations of how they're dealing with it. Back to a major, significant part of the training and making sure that everybody coming in just doesn't see something and walk into those kind of pinch points. That's a significant area. Kind of one of the last, maybe I was thinking about putting this first, but you know, do you end with culture again and talking about the significance of that, as Jonathan echoed, but instead of talking about it at the beginning, I want to talk about it at the end. You do need to change the culture when you're bringing in automation into the system. It's for people understanding how automation works, making sure that you're bringing in any behavior-based safety programs, looking at near misses, everything into the area, but understanding how automation is going to affect the operation. Back to point number 4, pinch points being the most dangerous. In some of the current operations, if you're handling a pallet, an operator handling a pallet with a manual, they may just set it down in the aisle, right, to doing it. In automation, you just created a pinch point that the AGV doesn't know really exists. So it's traveling down that aisle at 400 feet per minute and it doesn't think there's a pallet there. If somebody happens to be in that area, you've created a pinch point into that. So that's what I mean by thinking about the automation and how that's going to affect all the operations and everything there, that now inventory control, the handling of all the other equipment around there, creating clear paths and everything with this is very key for bringing into your operation this way. So it's back to that culture, it's back to the training, and it's back to everybody understanding how the automation works in this, because these things are running around your 1 million square foot warehouse. So everybody, even people walking out to lunch, need to know how to make sure they're interacting with this. That's all I have. Any questions or anything that has come up?
There have been a few questions.
Hopefully easy ones.
That's up to you. Can AGVs and AMRs detect manual forklifts in other powered equipment?
Yes, they can. I mean, they could use the safety scanners on there. They can detect them. Sometimes you can use telematics to actually understand where they are when you're detecting them that way. One trick, if you want to say, sometimes in looking at existing equipment, brownfield equipment, sometimes you may have to put actually a skirt around the base to give the scanners something to see, and put that in there to make sure that they're safe that way, instead of it just seeing through air if things are raised up off the floor a little bit. So that's one thing we look at when we're bringing in an AGV into an area. If there's some reason we need to put a skirt around the existing equipment so it can see it. The scanners or lasers, they go out and hit something and bounce back. If there's nothing there, they're not seeing it. So.
All right. What is the best way to interact with an AGV if I need to work in the AGV guide path?
Oh, okay. Typically, so I think they're referencing, it's probably not a normal operation, right? Something's going on and doing, I'm assuming that everybody to doing it. The best way to do that, the AGVs are going down through the guide path at the speed, but it's simple, put up cones, portable cones. You want to create a barrier that the AGV can see, put it out far enough from where you're working, create just a safe space that you're working in into doing it, space them around the area that you're doing so the AGV coming from any direction, depending on how the guide path is set up, can interact with it and see it.
Another question just came in. Where are we on the reliability of these types of systems? Are they improving, or is there room for improvement?
I'd say there's always room for improvement, right? As computer technology is getting faster, you're being able to transfer signals and look at camera technology is one of the bigger ones. Integrated video analytics is a new acronym you may start hearing, IVA, where you're putting vision onto things. Now that's helping to improve safety. It's maybe being able to look up and see things hanging from shelves and stuff like that instead of the lasers working into that area. But I think the original part of that question of reliability, they're very reliable. I mean, the number of safety instances that are there caused by the AGV running into something is minimal, and the technology is really hardened to make sure that things are safe.
Another quick question that came in. Do you think that we'll get new AMR standards for the U.S. market?
Yeah, they're working on R15.08, and there's a couple of parts to it that are going through. I think they've just released part 1, but there's going to be a part 2 and a part 3 that they're working on right now.
And then the final one I've got here is, do AGFs or AGVs, can they communicate with an existing lift truck if they have technology on that lift truck?
It can be done. I mean, you add some of the telematics onto the existing trucks that are there. Typically what gets into there a little bit is getting up to an upper level software system, though, that's kind of both are communicating into to create this interpreter between the two systems, if that makes sense. You've got a manual truck operating over here and over here. You've got to bring them up into one package to make sure you can connect the two into them, so make sure they're communicating well that way. So again, it'd probably be better to try to keep things apart as much as you can. I was just on the phone with a customer the other day that their powered industrial truck ran into the side of an AGV, so bent a half-inch thick piece of steel in pretty good. So luckily the operator was fine that was riding the manual, but it's things like that can happen. Okay?
Yeah, thank you very much.
Good.
Lorne.
Thank you.
Nice job, Lorne. Thank you. Our next speaker is Brian Duffy of Crown Equipment Corporation. And Brian is the Director of Corporate Compliance at Crown Equipment, headquartered in New Bremen, Ohio. He's responsible for EH&S compliance for Crown's operations worldwide. So it's a pretty significant and expansive role. He's a registered environmental manager and certified hazardous materials manager. Mr. Duffy earned a bachelor degree of science in environmental science from Bowling Green State University and a master of environmental planning degree from Arizona State University. His EH&S career spans 35 years, more than 30 of those with the Crown Corporation. Duffy has authored numerous papers on injury prevention, behavior-based safety, non-solvent parts cleaning, environmental compliance, sustainability, and energy management. Pretty expansive again. Under Mr. Duffy's leadership, Crown excels at practical applications of EH&S compliance and injury prevention and hosts numerous benchmarking tours for companies interested in learning about Crown's approach to vertical integration, safety, and sustainability. The company has also received numerous awards in the areas of environmental sustainability and injury prevention. With that, Brian, would love to hear what you have to say. Thank you.
Thank you, Chuck. I'm just glad to be here today. I want to thank everybody, the ITA, Jonathan, for orchestrating this, and all the other folks that have been involved with Forklift Safety Day. I gave a presentation a few years ago on safety culture, and this presentation today is going to be a kind of a takeoff of that. It's going to be some of the outgrowth of our safety culture, which is now formed into forklift safety. So again, it's been a great journey to try to get to this point, and we believe this is kind of a case study. There's going to be a lot here, and we realize that some organizations can't do all of the stuff that's in this presentation, but I think it'll give you some ideas about what kind of things you can do to start improving your forklift safety. And that's what it's all about, whether it's operators or pedestrians. So we'll get started here. The presentation title is It Takes Two. I'm not quite sure why we named it that. I think we weren't creative enough to come up with another name, so we're stuck with It Takes Two. That's not true. We'll show you in a little bit what that really is all about. Here's the agenda. I want to really just focus your attention on the second bullet, and that's the leadership, the passion, the priority, and my favorite topic, training. We've heard a lot about training today, and we've been through a lot with training. We have a great training program, but I want to put a little bit different spin on training and what's really required to make it effective. The other thing that I want to mention is we looked at our operators' behaviors, and you'll hear a lot about behavior-based safety in this talk, and we watched the behaviors that they were performing, and we found that they weren't always performing the correct behaviors. So that's what kind of spurred us to get moving in this topic. And so there's a whole lot of activity associated with that. And the first one, if this works, we wanted to show some micro-learning videos to try to show people what they're up against if they don't really realize it, whether it's in a manufacturing operation or whether it's just out on the road. There we go, up. Now I'm in trouble. Left to go backwards? Yeah. Left's not going, there we go. So I'm not sure we can get this moving.
Just hit it once and see.
What's that?
Just hit it once and see.
Doesn't work. Anyway, this is a video that shows a lift truck in a manufacturing facility, and then right outside of one of our plants, it shows a semi coming by and somebody who's walking on the sidewalk right next to that. They're in some significant danger if they were to get off of that pathway. So we try to use that analogy to show what happens in either a manufacturing operation or a warehouse, and tries to get their attention just to start this process. So we had to ask ourselves a few questions. The first one was, what are we doing today to prevent lift truck accidents? And some of these things you obviously recognize. Crown has a retraining program if somebody has an accident or has a problem with material handling. And we have what's called demonstrated performance, which shows us that the operators know what to do. And the reason I bring this up is when we get into the training, it becomes apparent that there's some other things involved here. But our demonstrated performance, we know the operators know what to do, and then we can build on that. Discipline, some people use discipline. And the last three are kind of the newer ones that we've put in place over the years. And you're going to hear a lot about observation and feedback. You're going to hear a little bit about positive feedback, which is the heart of one of our programs, our BBS program. And then personal connections, which I would go out on a limb and say not too many people look at this in their training program. But it's been very successful for us to incorporate personal connections into our training. The other thing we had to ask ourselves is, what are the priorities? And when I speak about training, and folks go from their training out on the floor to operate the lift truck, or if it's a pedestrian, same thing, they go out on the floor to do their job. What are the priorities for those folks? What puts them in the mode of following those aspects of their training? So piecework would be a good example. Piecework could be, and doesn't always have to be, but it could be a situation where I got to get this done, I got to get more and more, I got to go faster and faster. And so some of your training may suffer because of that. So the priorities we looked at for our folks, and we use that as one of our pinpoints to improve the process. And then what happens if there is a lift truck accident? What is the personal impact if that happens? And the last one here, our marketing people thought I made a mistake when I have habit strength. in that bullet. But we use habit strength as something that if you train people and they get it and they do the operation or they do the behavior, then it becomes habit strength. If you do it enough, it's like anything, you become a habit, just like putting a seatbelt on, for example. So we had to ask that question. So what did we do? How did we accomplish this change? We first decided, what are we going to do? What do we need to start the process? And we used our existing safety culture to move forward in this. And again, our safety culture has been based on a behavior-based safety process, peer-to-peer, in our manufacturing operations. And that's been going on for about 15 years. So we've had a lot of experience in behavior-based safety. And what goes along with that is observations and feedback, as I mentioned. And these observations and feedback are positive in nature. I can't stress that enough, because when I started doing observations, I went out and looked at people doing things the wrong way instead of trying to reinforce them for doing things the correct way. So that's been part of our behavior-based safety process, and we were able to build on that for this process that we've come up with. The other thing we needed to know is, are we going to put a commitment into this process? It's a 20-week process, and again, there's a lot in here, but we needed to know if we were going to have the commitment to take this on and to move it forward. As I mentioned earlier, there's about 4 main concepts that we needed to ensure that we had before we went through and started on this journey. And the first one is leadership, and everybody talks about leadership, but what does it mean? What is the actual physical impact of leadership? And in our case, we had a vice president who would go out and do gimbal walks as we started this process. So he would go out and he would be visible in the manufacturing operations, and that has a big impact on people. So not only at that level, and I think there's a slide in here that talks about directors, managers, getting them out of their office, getting them on the floor, and actually giving feedback with observations for our operators and pedestrians, which we'll talk about in a minute. So that's the visible support that we felt was necessary. Priority, this is tied to the leadership. If it's not going to be a priority, you're kind of spinning your wheels. You're into the program for the day, or what they call it. So we wanted to make sure that it was a priority, and we got that information, or we got that support as we started down the path. And so there's that group of folks who was involved, and it's really everybody within the facility. And there was a lot of walking through facilities plant-wide to start this process and to make sure folks knew what they were doing, and they were being recognized for doing those behaviors. This is the one that I mentioned that maybe we don't do enough of, and we started this part of it in our Safe Steps, our behavior-based safety program, where we talk to people about what happens if you get hurt, what happens if there's an accident, whether it's a lift truck accident, whether it's a pedestrian, whether it's any other kind of accident. Because these people, especially in our world of West Central Ohio, these could be your uncle, or could be your neighbor, could be the guy you eat lunch with every day. So we talk to people about that as we roll this out, and it kind of gets them thinking about really what are the impacts of having an accident, especially with a lift truck, but any accident. So we incorporate passion into our training, and that's why I say training. Training is one of my favorite topics to talk about, because again, training by itself may not be effective. And here it is, how effective is your training? What are you doing to reinforce that training once the operator, for example, gets out on the floor, and interacts with folks, the pedestrians are out there. And when we started this process, we went out and we did observations without really rolling the program out, because we wanted to see how they were doing with the behaviors that they were just taught in their training. And we found out that many of them were doing what they needed to do, but there was many or some that weren't exactly following those behaviors that they were taught in their training. So, again, it comes down to priorities. What's most important for that operator or for that pedestrian? And getting safety to be, number one or right up there, that can be difficult to do. I mentioned a couple times so far that we've been doing the behavior-based safety for quite some time, so that could be a whole nother discussion, a whole nother presentation, because there's a lot to that, and making observations and giving feedback, that can be very difficult if the training on that subject is not followed through. So we've had people who go through the behavior-based training, but again, like I did when I started, they go out and they find things that people are doing wrong. It seems like that is what folks do. They try to find things that are wrong and they try to fix them. But we have to shift that paradigm to get to positive reinforcement. And again, that's a big part of this whole process. And the other aspect to this is the coaching. We'll talk about that here in a second. So when we started, we had to try to get the folks into the game, so to speak. So we had plant meetings and we talked to folks. We started with leadership, then we got into managers, supervisors, and we talked about what we were doing and how it was a priority for Crown to get these behaviors set and followed. So one of the things we did for the leadership, we went back through and sent them through the training that they had before. So we refreshed that training with those bullets that you see there. We also went back through our Safe Steps process. That's our behavior-based safety process. And we looked at the pinpoints, which I'll show you here in a minute, so that they could refresh themselves on that. And then there's a coaching forum for the coaches, which I'll talk about. And the video that didn't work was one of the micro-learning videos that we came up with. And we have a number of those. And we play those in break rooms, and we show people those during plant meetings, for example, just to keep that freshness of the program. Then we wanted to make sure that they knew how to get out there and give feedback, even though they've been trained on doing observations and giving feedback. So there was daily departmental walks so we could give them examples of how to do it and how not to do it. So for example, if you see somebody who doesn't perform the expected behavior, there's a process that you go through to give them positive corrective action instead of getting on them and doing it in a negative way. And I'll tell you that whole behavior-based safety process that we employed has been a great improvement in relationships within our plants, within our people, whether it's peer-to-peer or employee to supervisor. It's just been, it makes for a much better environment within the plant. So we had to make sure that people were doing the observations and providing feedback appropriately because we didn't want that to derail the process. Another thing we did in order to get them ready is we talked about lift truck safety and pedestrian 1, 2, 3, just kind of a moniker that we use. Number one, don't allow yourself to be in the line of fire. And then there's bullet points that you can see attached to that. And then here's our reason for it takes two. I was kind of kidding you earlier. It takes two people. And this is really the heart of what happens when you're looking at behavior-based safety in lift trucks is folks have to acknowledge each other, where they're going, if they're turning. And if you go through our facilities now, you'll see a lot of pointing and a lot of this and a lot of interaction between operator and pedestrian, or two lift truck operators. And that's really the most visible thing that you can see as a result of this process. The last one there is one of the more challenging ones, to try to keep pedestrians 3 feet away from a lift truck. Because many times people will walk up to a guy on a lift truck, he's maybe just sitting there, not moving, but that's normal to go up there and talk to him. And nowadays, when somebody walks up, the operator will either push him back a little bit, hold him off, or he'll get off his truck, which is the ideal situation that we're looking for. And that's tough to do. That was a really difficult one. The last part of this is the coaching. We felt that we needed to keep track of this down on the floor, using some individuals that can keep track of the behaviors, write them down, and then talk about here in a minute. But again, it's positive and it's constructive. So again, that training for those folks needed to happen to make sure they were in the ball game as far as how to do the observations and provide feedback. And it's the same way with the pedestrians. So the coaches were a group of people. They were chosen based on their personality, based on the respect that the individual would get within the facility or within his department. And they meet regularly, they still meet regularly to go over the results of their observations and feedback. So if there's areas that need attention and focus shifts to that side of the business, that side of the plant, if there's individuals that don't get it, and believe me, there are a few people that we've run into that no matter what you do, they're not having anything to do with it. One of two things happens. One is they're brought in and they're talked to their plant manager, again, trying to make it in a constructive way, but still putting a little bit of pressure on them that, hey, if you don't get into the game, that position you're in may go away. And believe it or not, I don't know if you realize this, but being a lift truck operator is a desired position to be in. You get to travel around the plant, you're not stuck in one place. So if they kind of feel that they may lose that position and go somewhere else within the facility, that has an impact on them. So that's for the people that are the onesie-twosies that just don't want to do what you're trying to get them to do. So that's where the accountability comes in. And again, it's very few and far between. So I wanted to show you, hopefully you can see some of these. Lift truck behaviors, pedestrian behaviors, which are pretty typical of what we expect our operators and our pedestrians to do. But this is what they're being observed on, and this is where feedback occurs. And our feedback is pretty simple. Again, it's a gesture, maybe it's a great job, and it's a thank you. And I want to turn your attention to the other side, the right side of that slide. Those are our safe steps pinpoints, and really this is very similar. The behavior-based safety pinpoints, which we call safe steps, and the new lift truck behaviors, pedestrian behaviors, they're very, very similar, but the big thing with safe steps is we thank people for doing the behaviors that we're asking them to do. And that, again, that has a big impact, and it was part of that improvement of the culture within the organization, within the plant, within the department. So when you get into the behaviors, the typical ones for material handlers, these are the ones that we're all aware of, and this is how we started. We wanted to make sure that those basic behaviors are being followed, and we're doing observations and providing feedback to those people to make sure that they continue to do that. And then we have the same thing for pedestrians. And the coaches are really part of what's really made this work, because in many cases they're supervisors within a department, so they're respected, and if they're not respected, they're still followed. But we don't choose people that would not be respected. So those folks are very influential to the process. Again, I mentioned they meet periodically, and they've been trained to make the proper observations and feedback, especially the feedback, especially if it's an improvement opportunity, they have to know how to do positive corrective feedback. That's not always easy to do. So here are the pedestrian behaviors. The ones in green are the ones that we have been currently using. This is probably about a year and a half old. And then there's other behaviors that are pedestrian behaviors. There's other behaviors that are on the list waiting to be improved, or waiting to be put into place. So as these behaviors, and this is by plant, so the plants get to choose what behaviors they want to focus on. But as those behaviors become what we call habit strength, then they can be retired and you can add another behavior, a different behavior to your observations and feedback. So here's another slide showing the lift truck behaviors. Again, I think we're all pretty familiar with what those are. And so the same thing applies. We put a number, and we try to stay with about 3 or 4 behaviors at a time. We don't want to overwhelm the coaches. We don't want to make the operators always thinking about too many of the behaviors, because it's a process that goes on over time. And we're still doing it. We're still changing behaviors, retiring behaviors when they become habit strength. The one thing that I mentioned earlier is this thing takes a commitment. It's a 20-week process, and again, there's a lot to it, but this is how we implemented it, and again, there's a lot of time, weeks 5 to 19, where we brought people out on the floor, went through the departments, and did the feedback, and do the observations and provide the feedback. So folks would see that happen over a period of 14 weeks. So they were getting used to it, and that's how we kind of started and moved forward with the implementation. As I mentioned earlier, we also put the folks through, the coaches, the supervisors, through the leadership training, the typical lift truck training that we typically use for people, just to refresh their memories. So the implementation plan is really the same thing as the last slide, but it shows how much work there was to put this in place. And again, maybe you don't have to do everything that we've talked about, but once you start getting into that mode, if your safety culture is strong enough, and you start getting into the mode of observing behaviors, providing feedback, and getting operators, pedestrians, and just the general plant or warehouse population to provide that feedback, that gesture of where I'm going, what I'm doing, and the other guy might thank him for that. You've got something going when you can get to that point. And lastly, our results. So this shows what happened after we started implementing the process. This represents all lift truck accidents over probably 4,000 people. I'm not sure exactly how many operators were involved, but you can see there's been a dramatic decrease in the number of incidents, both in our Ohio campus and then our remote facilities, and it's almost identical. The other thing at the bottom of this shows the percentage of compliance with those behaviors that we were talking about. So we were up around 95% of compliance with the behaviors. And I will tell you, and this is during the pandemic, so there was other challenges associated with this. And that continues today, because it's like a lot of things. I mentioned priority. If we let this slide, if we don't stay focused on this, those priorities, whatever they are, will take over. And if the priority is safety, hey, you got a good situation going. But if the priority is production and some other things that get in the way of safety, then you might have a little bit of a problem. So we continue to focus on this. We continue to do observations, provide feedback, and it's kind of ingrained in the facilities that we're working with, because we've been doing the BBS for that long. So folks are used to it. It's not a big deal like it was when we first started, which again is another whole story we could talk about. But so that's kind of the case study that we went through in order to get to the point where we were comfortable that our operators and our pedestrians were following those behaviors that we needed them to follow. And we believe that by doing that, that's going to continue to result in less lift truck incidents. And we've seen it again in the statistics. we've seen it on the floor. When you go talk to people or you observe what's going on, you can see a change within the facilities. So it's been very successful, and hope this helps generate some ideas for you. And I'll take some questions if that's appropriate.
Yes, thank you, Brian. We've had a few questions. Let me just address one that we've had several questions repeated. Will this series be available, this presentation, today's presentation, be available online? The answer to that is yes. Video recording of today's webinar and sessions will be available on indtrk.org, which is the Industrial Truck Association's website, as well as dcvelocity.com, who is the media sponsor for National Forklift Safety Day this year. So yes, they'll be available online. A question for you, Brian, is there's so much difficulty in hiring and retraining forklift operators and warehouse workers these days. Turnover is very high, as we've heard. Is it hard to manage a complicated program like this in a high turnover environment, or do you think it's helpful in that environment?
It's definitely helpful. There's no question about it. Is it difficult? It is difficult just because of the numbers. Just the problem that we're all having with bringing people in and keeping good people. Yeah, that's a challenge. Now, typically, to get to be a lift truck operator, it may take a while. You may have to move through a couple different positions. Sometimes yes, sometimes no. But I think we look at our employees that come into play, and if they're destined to be a lift truck operator, they've been vetted for sort of their behavior, their personality. So we look at that a little bit as we put people in those positions. But with turnover, yeah, it's difficult. But again, a lot of this stuff is ingrained in the operation, so it's part of our training now.
There's another question here, similar to what Jonathan had with KION and Lindy. Does Crown provide training outside of your company to your customer base, either through your manufacturing headquarters or through your dealers?
We do provide training. Now, this type of training is not available. This is really about a 2-year journey that we've been on, and that's still within our manufacturing and our warehousing groups, our corporate offices and our remote facility, I should say our Ohio facilities. So right now, this type of training is not available, but it makes sense. I mean, we're very passionate about the way that it works, and we're very hopeful that it does continue to be incorporated into training.
But you do offer your customers training?
Yes.
Yeah, operator
yes.
training.
And I will say there's parts to this, I should have mentioned this earlier, there's parts of this that are incorporated into our training that we provide customers with. So it doesn't go as far as this particular presentation goes, but yeah, we do put in some observations and some positive reinforcement for operators and pedestrians.
I think you just answered this, but how long has Crown been implementing this program?
It's been about a 2-year journey. Yeah. So we started off slow, and we moved into other facilities, so it's taken some time, but it's about a 2.5 year journey.
All right, that's the last
Great.
question online. Let's see if there's any from in the room. No. Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Brian, that was just excellent. Really well done.
Thank you.
So, yeah, Crown is very fortunate to have you leading its EH&S effort, no doubt about it.
Thank
So,
you.
Great job. So with that, I'd like to bring this year's National Forklift Safety Day to a close by thanking, of course, all the participants, the speakers, the ITA staff. Just another great event. Jonathan, thanks for leading this year's event. Great job there as well. I think it's important as we kind of depart and go on our way, it's important for us to understand the importance and the scope and size that we and our customers have, that we collectively represent, to get a true understanding of the impact that we can have moving and improving forklift safety. When you think about the worldwide market for forklift trucks in 2021, it was 2.3 million units. It's just a huge number. In the U.S. alone, it was over 350,000 units. So the magnitude of kind of what we touch and who we touch is pretty significant. And so we can see the prevalence of how important forklift safety is in the workplace, because we continue to have more and more operators every day using our equipment. So with that, again, we all have an impact on safety. Very much appreciate you, and we appreciate those that attended virtually very much. And again, thanks for being here, and please stay safe, and good luck. Take care. Thank you.